Well, 2022 is starting off with some very serious threats, right? If you look worldwide, or if you just started here in Israel, right? Israel is both fighting a war currently and preparing for another. They're fighting the COVID war. The rates, because of Omicron, are off the charts. The highest record numbers every single day of new infections. Fortunately, they all mostly seem more mild, right? As people are seeing around the world. That's the war Israel's fighting today. But they are preparing for a potential mother of all regional wars, and that is a possible preemptive strike on the Iranian nuclear facilities. There's more talk, as you know, as you've been reporting here on CBN, more talk of Israeli military forces preparing for these type of strikes, and a growing sense that there may not be any other way, that Iran shows no interest in cutting a good deal, or maybe any deal, in the Vienna talks. I can't find a single Israeli official that will tell me they have any confidence that the Biden administration would take military action to neutralize the Iranian threat, which is putting an enormous amount of pressure on the Israeli system to get ready. It may have to do it. I hope not.
So as we look forward to 2022, we're left with the legacy of 2021 in the region. One of that is the pullout of the U.S. from Afghanistan, which weakened the U.S. And now we see that Russia is building up forces on the Ukrainian border. How important do you see that development?
The crisis with Russia doesn't immediately affect Israel at the moment. But under Vladimir Putin, he is amassing, we think, upwards of 140,000 Russian troops on the border of Ukraine. And by the way, that's not that far away from the Baltics. The Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, these are NATO allies under Article 5. If Russia goes in there, then the NATO treaty would be triggered, and the United States and all the rest of the NATO forces would have to go to war with Russia, or the entire NATO system collapse if we don't, rescue those countries. Ukraine is not a NATO ally. Ukraine desperately wants to be a NATO ally, a member of NATO. And the U.S. and the other countries have shown interest in how can we work together. And the Russians, Putin is really drawing the line, saying if Ukraine gets any closer geopolitically, diplomatically, militarily, economically with the West, we're going to invade. They might invade anyway. So this is a huge crisis which doesn't immediately directly affect Israel. Why is it important? It's important because it's a test of Biden. What's happening is because of the failure of Biden to be and look strong in Afghanistan, the fact that he surrendered to the terrorist Taliban regime in Afghanistan means that every other enemy in the world is saying, well, if Biden can't handle the Taliban, what can we do? What could we get? What could we take that we didn't think was possible under Trump or other previous American presidents? What I'm watching right now is the idea that Putin thinks that he can go get part or all of Ukraine, or possibly other countries in Europe, at least look like the strong man in the region and get everyone scared of him. China is threatening the possibility of an invasion and a seizure of Taiwan. Iran is moving towards breakout capacity for nuclear weapons. I mean, if you just took those three, all three of those worst case scenarios, Rosenberg novels, could happen in 2022. That's how dangerous it is right now. That's what happens when an American president displays weakness. This is not the Reagan-Trump peace through strength model. This is weakness begets danger.
Exactly. One other thing of those 14 points was whether or not Saudi Arabia would enter into, the historic Abraham Accords, this historic normalization with Israel and many of its Sunni Arab nations. Do you see that happening?
I think one of the most exciting developments that could happen in 2022 is a Saudi-Israeli peace agreement, normalization agreement. I'm not ready to predict that it will happen. I think both sides are, I think Israel definitely wants it. I think the Saudis are actively considering, is this in our best interest? And I'll tell you, Chris, something that I haven't said yet publicly, but I think it's important to say. The Biden administration has been pulling ballistic missile defense batteries, like the Patriot system, out of Saudi Arabia. And the Saudis are looking for a reason to give their people, why should we make peace with Israel at all? And why should we do it now? I think that's a big question because the Saudi people have been so against Israel for so long. But what if the normalization deal involves Saudi money and Israeli technology building a regional missile defense system against Iran and all of Iran's proxies, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas? That is a reason for a king and a crown prince in Saudi Arabia to say to the people, listen, we're making peace because it's good for Saudis. We're getting attacked with more than 200 ballistic missiles. They all come from Iran, but we've joined forces with Israel to build out a defense system. Now, the United States should play a role in that. Biden should realize this is a huge opportunity. Where is Joe Biden going to get a major foreign policy win and maybe a Nobel Peace Prize in the process? Anywhere else on the planet, I don't see an opportunity right now except a Saudi-Israeli peace deal. So I'm watching closely. We're reporting on it closely at All Israel News, but I'm not ready to predict it's going to happen. I think it's one of the most fascinating stories in the region.
Yeah. You also have some of the domestic U.S. Issues on that last Roe versus Wade, whether that be overturned. Joe Biden, his physical health, could the 25th Amendment be enacted? But you also talk about a great awakening. Talk about that and talk about how can people be praying for Israel in the Middle East during this time?
Well, I first will say how fascinating and as evangelical Christians, how encouraging, how exciting the possibility that the horribly decided Roe v. Wade decision at the Supreme Court from 1973 federalizing, legalizing federal at every level abortion on demand, essentially, it could be taken down as early as this summer. Like there's the case that was just litigated. This could be the end of Roe v. Wade. That's amazing. It wouldn't mean, of course, that that's the end of all abortion, but states would be allowed to make their own decisions. Some states would immediately ban all or nearly all abortions. Other states would make it completely available. But this would save hundreds of thousands of unborn babies' lives. It'd be amazing. This is what we've been praying for since 1973. So, but here's the thing. We're already past 60 million babies murdered over these past, 50 years or so. And my view, and I wrote about it in a book called Implosion 10 years ago, if a country murders 60 million babies, you can't survive. Judgment is coming. Now, if God allows and brings about sovereignly a great awakening, a spiritual revival, and a country begins to repent, well, God will relent for a while. Nineveh, right, was so horrible, so wicked, so murderous that God was going to judge and destroy the city of Nineveh and the capital of the Assyrian Empire. God sent Jonah to tell the story, like, you're getting judgment, 40 more days, and you're all going to be judged. But they repented, right? Even the king repented and begged God for mercy. And when people repent, God will relent. Now, not forever, because what happened? Well, God did save and rescue and give the people of Nineveh more time. But 150 years later, we read the book of Nahum, that the grandchildren and great-grandchildren in Nineveh of the people that had repented, they had gone right back to the same sins and worse. And so God sends another Hebrew prophet, Nahum, and preaches again, repent or face judgment. But this time, the people of Nineveh didn't repent. And what happened? God brought judgment, and the entire city of Nineveh was, in fact, destroyed. I think what that tells us is we need to keep praying for America. It's not over till it's over. Judgment has to come. You can't kill 60 million babies and avoid the judgment of God. But if the church is faithful in praying and pleading for God's mercy, God may choose in his sovereignty to relent for a while longer. Yeah. And that's something we really have to pray for, because we could win the Roe v. Wade case, and we're still going to face judgment at some point. I pray it's not in 2022, but I wouldn't predict it one way or the other.
Here in Israel, we have a fragile coalition government. It seems like there's been a number of possibilities where it could fall. Just recently, there's been a crisis as well. Talk us about the coalition. Do you think that it can last through 2022?
I think that one of the most fascinating parts of Israeli politics right now is that the Bennett-Lapid coalition has lasted this long. It's been more than 6 months now. It's a 60-60 split. I mean, you basically can't, have a bad falafel meal and go to bed sick and not make it to the Knesset the next day without the whole government collapsing. Like, everybody has to show up all the time. I wouldn't possibly try to predict whether the Israeli coalition that we currently see constructed can last. It can. I mean, certainly it can, but will it? It has longer than most analysts would have thought, and I think that shows a lot of shrewd maneuvering by Naftali Bennett, the Prime Minister, and Foreign Minister Yair Lapid. But this thing, by the time this airs, the government could be gone. Like, seriously, it's that it hangs by a thread. And so, All Israel News, our team, we don't take a position on whether it should fall or whether Netanyahu should get back. We don't take a partisan position. We're just calling the balls and strikes. We're calling the game, play by play, and with a little color commentary as well.
Yeah. Well, now that we're on the eve of 2022, without going into all the things, we've got a lot of the 14 points that you had. It sounds like Woodrow Wilson, actually. So talk us, just finally, your conclusion. All the people you've talked to, looking ahead, what do you feel for this coming year?
I think Israel's big decision is, do we have to go and launch preemptive military strikes against Iran? We've never had to do it before. We've always found a way through covert operations and all kinds of other shadow activities to keep Iran from getting the bomb without having to go to what's called a kinetic war, a full-on actual war. But I think those options are running thin, running out, and I think there's a real possibility. Not for a decade have I seen it this close that Israeli leaders are talking. I don't hear it as hyperbolic. I don't hear it as trying to be sensationalistic. I think Israeli leaders are realizing this is it. Iran has gone past all of the previous red lines that any Israeli government has ever said. But no Israeli prime minister wants to go to war. Nobody wants to start a war with Iran, especially, as you and I have discussed before, with 150,000 Iranian-built missiles in Lebanon, controlled by Hezbollah. That's the frontline defense. If Israel hits the Iranian nuclear facilities, Iran could unleash the Hezbollah missile force. And that would be a war that I describe actually in my recent novel, The Beirut Protocol, but that is not a war we want to be in. We might have to do it. But I mean, those stakes are just so high, and I think to me, that's the far away the biggest story. But the subplot to that is the weakness in Washington. That Israeli leaders, Arab leaders that I talk to, everybody in the region, and you see it all over the world, they don't believe that Biden has the strength. Set aside his physical condition, which is an open question. They don't think he has the strength of will, of character perhaps, of resolve to take on Putin and the Chinese and the Iranians. And I think that what I worry about, what I think everybody in this region is worrying about is, what if Putin and President Xi in Beijing and the supreme leader of Iran decide no one's going to stop us? Let's go get what we want. That's the big X factor in 2022.
Yeah. You also mentioned, I think it was number 3 on your list, big tech, big government, and the threat they pose to freedom. Is that another one of the major things you're thinking?
Well, there's a lot of challenges flashing on the dashboard right now, and any one of the ones we've talked about is big. But look, you have big pharma, big tech, big government converged, and a lot of Americans fear that they are losing their freedoms, and it's not fear; I mean, it's happening. Their abilities to keep their churches open have been severely challenged and threatened. And courts have not upheld the right of churches to open. So this is a problem. Of course, Biden has federalized the response to COVID. He came into office saying, I will stop this virus. I won't stop the economy. I won't shut down the economy. I'll shut down the virus. That was his mantra. COVID has exploded. More than 400,000 deaths. 400,000 Americans have died just in 2021. And now Biden, at the end of the year, conceded, okay, there's no federal solution. Except that he's spending enormous amounts of money, untold trillions that the United States doesn't have. And he's imposing federal mandates on employers to force employees to be vaccinated against their will or face, huge fines and all kinds of other issues. This is going to the Supreme Court. So there's a real problem right now, and people are being thrown off of social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, others. President Trump and others are trying to create new social media platforms, but there's a sense that many Americans feel, wow, I'm actually being throttled. I'm being silenced. I'm being told I can't participate in these public forums because big government on one hand and big tech on the other are telling me I can't talk. I can't say what I believe. That's chilling. And there's a real sense that people in Washington are using this crisis, this health crisis, which is real, but they're using it to achieve very dangerous ends that are taking basic constitutional freedoms away from average American citizens. And other governments all over the world are doing it too, and it's a real problem.
It's a worldwide phenomenon.
A real problem, yeah.
Last question, you're working on a book, your next novel. Can you tell us just a little bit about it?
No, except I will say that it's a fifth installment in the Marcus Ryker series. Marcus Ryker being the hero of my books, former Marine, former Secret Service agent, tries to get out of government, and they just pull him back in, and he finds himself at the tip of the spear in some very, very dangerous events. I love writing this character. I find it fascinating to write fiction. True, I'm a journalist again in my life, and all Israel news, all Arab news. I used to like saying I just make things up for a living, but now I do both. I try to be journalistic and write novels on the side, but I can't say anything more yet.
All right.
But you'll be one of the first to know, Chris, when I'm ready.
We look forward to that, and thanks for joining us, Joel, and giving us your insight and analysis.
My honor. Thank you.